Good afternoon, and welcome to another Marine Log webinar exclusive. I'm Heather Irvin, Editor-in-Chief of Marine Log, and I'm going to be your host. There are more than 300 ports in the U.S., which are a fundamental part of the country's maritime transportation system, as thousands of vessels utilize these ports and terminals to load and offload cargo. Ports are a key contributor to economic and national security, and it's important to the maritime industry to advance transportation policy that backs ports' role in delivering economic prosperity. In today's webinar, we will discuss these topics and more with some of the country's most important inland and coastal ports and a port association. Before introducing our guests, I'd like to take a brief moment to recognize the sponsor of today's webinar, Nokia. As a technology innovator, Nokia has pioneered deployments with industrial-grade 4G, 5G cellular network, on-premises edge computing, and ruggedized devices for port terminal operators around the world. Nokia currently has over 635 customers that have adopted private networks, and their research with global data showed that close to 80% of early adopters have achieved ROI within 6 months. And finally, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Joining me is Dr. Noel Hasagaba, COO of Port of Long Beach in California, Mac Wade, Executive Director of Morgan City Harbor and Terminal District in Louisiana, Carrie Davis, President and CEO for the American Association of Port Authorities, and Jason Rohn, Director of Communications and Marketing for Duluth Seaway Port Authority in Minnesota. So as you see, we have people all over the country here representing ports, and I just really want to thank everyone for joining Marine Log today. I'd like to start this off by having each of you briefly tell us about your port or organization. Dr. Hasagaba, let's start with you.
Sure, Heather. And first of all, it's a pleasure to join you and my colleagues here. Thanks for having us on Marine Log. The Port of Long Beach is part of a complex that's comprised of the Port of Los Angeles, along with Long Beach, that is the major gateway for trans-Pacific trade. Approximately 40% of America's waterborne imports arrive through our complex. So we are a massive economic engine that generates 1 out of 5 jobs in the city of Long Beach, over 2 million jobs across the nation. In fact, the economic impact of our port complex reaches all 435 congressional districts. So when you talk about the impact of ports, our complex certainly fits the bill. We are also a trailblazer when it comes to environmental sustainability. We are well on our quest to zero emissions operations, and I know that's a topic that we'll be touching on here in a few moments. But again, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you. Mac, could you please share with us a little bit more about your port?
Thank you, Heather. Mac Wade with the Port of Morgan City, Louisiana. We've been in business since 1952. We are along the Gulf Coast. We're considered a medium draft port, where our authorized channel is 20 foot deep by 400 foot wide. We're in a unique situation down here. A lot of people don't even want, but Chafalaya River, we're on the Chafalaya River, which drains 30% of the Mississippi River and Red River every day, 7 days a week. So we have a tremendous waterway system into the heartland of the U.S., but the Morgan City was strategically located along the GIWW, Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, that basically runs from Brownsville, Texas, all the way across the Gulf, all the way up the East Coast. Where, to be successful in the port business, you really need all 4 segments, and that is you got to have a good waterway system, you got to have a highway system, you got to have rail, you got to have an airport. Port of Morgan City, we're very fortunate we have all 4 of those components here at the port. Like I say, we're located, we have about 1,900 foot of waterfront. We have 35 acres of laydown area at the port, and we have like BNSF is our main line that comes in to the port for the rail. With that, I'll turn it over to the next.
Thank you, Mac. Jason, Mr. Rohn, could you please tell us a little bit more about Duluth?
Sure. Thanks, Heather. So the Port of Duluth Superior is North America's furthest inland seaport. We are the #1 port by tonnage on the Great Lakes and one of the nation's top 20. So as the furthest inland seaport, we occupy a special niche at the westernmost edge of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system. And that, of course, is our connection to the world and has been since the Seaway opened in 1959. The Port of Duluth Superior and two docks slightly to the north of us attribute to 80% of the nation's first pour steel, which moves across Lake Superior to the lower Great Lakes. So the Port of Duluth Superior is obviously a key link in the nation's steelmaking supply chain. And that's the largest component of our tonnage. But we've been a port since 1871 in terms of being a commercial port. It's most commonly known as a bulk non-hazardous natural resources port. Obviously, the iron ore is a huge part of that for us, comprises about 50% of our tonnage each season. But we also move tons and tons of limestone and grain and cement and salt and other bulk commodities like that. In addition, we also handle break bulk, project cargoes, all those kinds of things as well. Heavy lift cargoes, wind energy for all of the wind turbine installations that go up through the upper Midwest all the way into Canada. It becomes a key hub for those kinds of cargoes, given our geographic location as the furthest inland seaport. So we're served by 4 Class 1 railroads, which is somewhat unique in the port industry. We have excellent road and rail clearances to the hinterlands. So that and uncongested port, uncongested highways, and personalized service, that's kind of what stands as a hallmark for the Port of Duluth Superior.
Wonderful. And Carrie, last but certainly not least, can you tell us a little bit more about the American Association for Port Authorities?
Heather, thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm a longtime marine log reader, actually, so it's really an honor to be here. It's also really an honor to be here with Noel, Mac, and Jason, because their ports, in addition to about 135 other ports across the Western Hemisphere, make up AAPA, the American Association of Port Authorities. We've been around as a business trade association for 112 years. I come to you from Washington, D.C. I can practically see the Capitol building outside of my window. We are the representative of and meeting place for seaports all across the hemisphere, Canada, US, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We do professional development, publications, events, best practices, and we lobby for, we are the fierce advocates for the needs of United States ports when it comes to decisions that the president and that the Congress are making about our transportation policy. Thanks so much for this opportunity. I'm excited to talk about ports, but also learn from Noel, Mac, and Jason about what specific ports are doing across the country.
Thank you, Carrie. I feel the same way. I'm excited to hear more of what your responses will be to my questions today. Carrie, I'm going to stay with you for a minute here. As we know, energy prices are on the rise. Can you tell us how U.S. ports are handling this issue and how international conflicts seem to prevent stabilization in this sector, on top of, though, public and private pressure to decarbonize?
Yeah, wow, you are ripping off the Band-Aid with a toughie to begin with. I would say this issue, as it plays out in 2 different ways, is most top of mind for ports and U.S. shipping at this moment. That's not to say it's the only issue we're working on. You're going to hear about a lot of them. But because of the quote unquote black swan events that seem to, they're no longer black. I don't know if these are white or gray or just your regular swan, because all of these disruptive events, everything from natural disasters to war, are drastically upending markets for tradable commodities such as energy products, and are causing wild swings in supply, demand, and price. I was just with Drury. This is a market analyst and advisor from London, and I was looking at the outlook, the possible outcomes for oil markets and the price for oil. There are such vast different possibilities of where we could end up here. Yes, because some of the largest oil producing and consuming countries in the world are in hot wars, including Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and including the conflagration that just picked up in Israel and Palestine, so close to many of the oil-producing Arab states. my gosh, are these disruptive events having a huge impact on prices? What we're seeing in the United States is since the US became a net exporter of LNG about 3 years ago, give or take, we've seen a surge in construction of LNG export terminals, most especially in the southeast of the country and the Gulf. And of course, a lot of American LNG exports, while they don't directly displace oil and petroleum produced elsewhere in the world, they do help offset some of the lack of supply from these conflicts that are raging. So huge growth building opportunity for American exporters in the LNG front. My last comment on this is what we saw this weekend, which is the announcement of the long-awaited Federal Hydrogen Hubs program, which is a product of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law from 2021. And this is a Department of Energy program to create 8 hydrogen-producing hubs across the country, some of which are located near coastal, easy to export areas, of the idea that the U.S. could become a leading hydrogen producer and export that energy commodity around the world. There's no shortage of things happening. I just wanted to give a couple senses of things I'm seeing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Noel, I'm going to hop over to you for a second here. Keeping with the topic of decarbonization and the environment, what should ports be doing to adapt, and what should carriers expect?
Well, in one word, everything. You know, as Carrie very well framed, we're going through, the world and the national port system is at an inflection point. Here in Long Beach, we've been at it since 2005 when we first embarked on what we call the Green Port Policy. It's gone through an evolution. We are now at a point where we're very well on our path to zero emissions operations. And what we're doing here in Long Beach is we're looking at a zero emissions port operations future. By 2030, we envision all cargo handling equipment of any type to be zero emissions by 2030. By 2035, all trucks that enter our port complex would be zero emissions as well. The key question is, how are we going to get there? I think there's a lot of alignment from a policy standpoint, both at the state and federal level. And as Carrie said, just last Friday, the Department of Energy made a bold announcement by recognizing 8 hydrogen hubs, one of them being here in California. And so one of the things that we're going through here on the West Coast in Los Angeles and Long Beach specifically is how to ensure that the operating environment enables our industry partners, our terminal operators, and every industry stakeholder so that we can get there, meet these goals of zero emissions cargo handling equipment by 2030, zero emissions trucks by 2035. This hydrogen hub that we are a part of is going to help the state of California get there, but not just the state of California. It will benefit the entire nation by making the generation of hydrogen and the use of hydrogen more scalable, more cost-effective over time. Another initiative that we launched earlier this year is what we call Pure Wind. And Jason made reference to wind turbines. Here in Long Beach, we contemplate building out a site, a 400-acre site that will be used to stage, assemble, and reposition these massive wind turbines that will help the state of California meet its goal of generating 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power by the year 2045. And this is all in an effort to ensure that our state and the country is going to be in a position to move away from fossil fuels and not just decarbonize ports like ours, but ensure that the national system, the national transportation system, is put in a position to tap every possible use of renewable energy so that we can meet those goals. So here in Long Beach, we cannot be prouder of the work we're doing. We know that there's more to do. But when we look ahead at what the state of California is doing, what the Department of Energy, this administration, and the Congress are doing by allocating the historic amounts of funding to initiatives like these, we could not be more optimistic about what the future holds. And we will continue to be a trailblazer. I would also add, from an international standpoint, the announcement that the IMO made just in this past July by setting a goal of net zero emission ships by 2050 by or around 2050, again, is a directional alignment to where we see things headed for our industry.
This is very thorough. Thank you, Dr. Hasagaba. Jason, from what I understand, the Duluth Seaway Port Authority is actively working to reduce its environmental footprint, I think as most ports are, hopefully. How is the Port Authority involved in greener fueling alternatives for vessels themselves?
So we don't own the ships, but we definitely want to play a role in making sure that the vessels have a successful transition to whatever comes out as the winner in the green fuel sweepstakes, right? So we have a unique characteristic here in the Port of Duluth Superior and with the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system as a whole, in that we aren't just talking about the ocean-going vessels that visit our port. We're also talking about what we call lakers, and those are the vessels that only operate within the freshwater Great Lakes. So the vessels that sail in the ocean, they get replaced much more rapidly and frequently than some of these lakers that have been sailing on the Great Lakes for upwards of 50 years at this point. So when you're talking about making the transition to greener fuels for the vessels that call on our port, it's a two-part scenario where we're talking about not only the ocean-going vessels that turn over quickly and can be remade with the new types of engines really quickly, but we're also talking about these lakers that have been venerable vessels still working our port for a long time and that aren't necessarily as easy to retrofit to new types of fuel. So it's an interesting scenario for us. We're definitely active participants in those conversations where it's really going to come to fruition for the Port Authority or be a focal point for the Port Authority is our responsibility to be a bunkering hub for whatever emerges as the next green fuel. And that'll obviously have real estate and infrastructure implications for the Port Authority. So that's something we're really focused on in terms of the conversation, knowing that we don't own the ships. We don't necessarily have to deal with how we're going to work the engines, but we do have to figure out how we're going to handle providing the infrastructure to make it a successful transition. So that's one side of the answer in terms of the vessels themselves and emissions. For the Port Authority, our immediate focus is really on our shoreside facilities. That's what we are immediately in control of. And as Noel talked about, looking toward electrification, certainly of the machines and all of our operations on our terminal. One unique characteristic here in Duluth Superior is, of course, the cold weather. We have to be able to operate our terminal when it's 30 below 0 Fahrenheit and things like that. So that has an effect on the decision making that we have here in the Port of Duluth Superior as we look to reduce our environmental footprint in those ways. Another factor for us is we were a founding member of Green Marine, and that is an alliance that several of the ports throughout North America are involved with. We're a founding member of that, so we've been monitoring emissions and our environmental footprint for a number of years now to be a part of that ever more challenging rating system that Green Marine has. So we've been actively involved in that. Our regional energy provider is 60% renewable now. So we're working closely with them on an electrification plan for our port facilities. Looking forward to seeing what the future brings there, certainly. And then we're also working on our first climate action plan for the Port of Duluth Superior that will roll out here in the spring. So that will help govern our efforts further and help us continue to advance what we're doing here in the Port of Duluth Superior at our terminal facilities, and also be in the mix for those U.S. EPA Clean Ports grants that will be predicated on those climate action plans.
So sustainability and decarbonization is obviously a huge point of focus for most ports, it sounds like. Mac, what is Morgan City Harbor and Terminal District doing to address greening your operations, or at least participating in sustainable efforts?
Heather, I'm glad you asked that question. I'd like to say the Port of Morgan City, we have been after this for many years. We didn't even know what it was called 40 years ago. We have been reducing the carbon footprint since the 70s on our dredging activities. As I mentioned, the Mississippi River, 30% every day flows down the Chafalaya. With that, 33 states along the Mississippi, 2 provinces in Canada, all that sediment that gets washed down, 30% winds up down here. We have been reducing the carbon footprint when we didn't even know we were doing that years ago. We have in the river, we do a lot of dredging. In fact, in 2015, at the climate talks in Paris, Morgan City, of all places, was mentioned in one of the feature stories down there over at Paris. It's where we were dredging material. They placed it in the river and let Mother Nature do the rest. I like to say everything flowing down the Mississippi River, it's like Miracle-Gro. That's how lush. You hear Louisiana, they say, well, I don't know what he's talking about. Louisiana is losing thousands of acres. You're right, but not along the Atchafalaya River. They say Louisiana is losing a football field every hour. I make an end zone every hour. That's how much sediment we have coming down. So as far as the carbon footprint, we're reducing that. We've been doing it for a long time. One of the things we've done in most of our dredging activities, about 90% of it goes for beneficial use. We're probably, that's in the excess of over 10 million yards a year. That's a lot of sand. That's a lot of sediment being moved. What does this do? It helps protect our coastline. It helps protect us from hurricanes. But it's very costly to do all that. It costs a lot to run dredges. We have 4 under contract. I have another one coming in. We have done one thing that's very beneficial out in our bar channel. From Morgan City to the sea buoy is 40 miles, 20 miles to the mouth of the river. From Eugene Island out to the sea buoy, the last 13 miles, all that sediment coming down, got a lot of clays and silts in it. They don't settle out until they get to the Gulf, until they get about 5 miles out in the salt water. With the salinity, then that's when the material starts flocking out. Before, we had a mud hole out there. I had 20-foot draft, but I had 10 foot of mud in it, laying about 5 miles offshore. Well, us of the Corps of Engineers and a company called Bryce Civil Constructors, we were the first to utilize agitation dredging. People are going to say, well, Mac, you couldn't have been the first. Agitation, not water injection, not cutter head, not hopper dredges. We built an agitation dredge, and that agitation dredge has been out there for over 3 years in the bar channel, and it has reduced the sediment load of the density of the material where we can get ships to be able to sail through the area. It was a Achilles heel for the port for a long time. But along with this company and the Corps of Engineers, working with them hand in hand, we've been able to reduce where this runs. All it does is suck the material up off the bottom, and we jet it off the sides. We're dredging with nature. We let the winds, the tides, and the current do the rest. So yes, we're using mechanical means to bring the material up, but after that, we let Mother Nature do it, and reduces the carbon footprint tremendously. A lot less diesel has to be burned getting those efforts, getting the material where we need it. And with that, Heather, I'll close on that.
Thank you, Mac. That was good. That was a good overview. Let's move on to a new topic that is perhaps equally important to ports and their operations. The role of IT and goods movement through the rest of the decade should be examined. Will ports, shippers, and carriers make the transition to secure data sharing and real-time tracing of cargo to benefit logistics operators? I thought maybe, Noel, you could have some insight into that.
Sure, Heather. Happy to address that topic. And before I do, let me just say this. Prior to the supply chain crisis, I like to say that ports were invisible. Folks would go to the hardware store or they'd go to the retail store, buy a product that said, made overseas, wouldn't give any thought to how it got here. The supply chain crisis changed that, right? And that's the reason why you have these historic buckets of funding now available. And I want to thank AAPA. Long Beach is a proud member of AAPA. They are a fierce advocate for all ports. And if it wasn't for all of us working together to educate the Congress, the administration on how important ports are to the national economy, we wouldn't have these opportunities, right? So now let me segue into IT. Another inflection point facing our industry is the need to close a legacy gap on what I call end-to-end visibility. That was exacerbated and magnified many times over during the supply chain crisis. Basic questions like, when is my container going to arrive at the terminal? When is it going to be available for pickup? When can I send in my drayage company to pick it up? Those basic questions, shippers were not able to answer. And as an industry, we've been trying to address that topic for years now. And what we've all concluded, certainly in recent years, is we've got to work together to close that gap. Here in Long Beach, we launched the Supply Chain Information Highway. If you think about it, it's a way to get the data out to the shippers, put it in the hands of the shippers so that they can then use it and optimize their own supply chains, make real-time decisions, operational decisions, so that they can then coordinate with their partners, whether it's the trucking companies, the terminals, or the railroads. But along the journey, one of the things that we've discovered, and one of the things that we must keep in mind at the forefront, is data security, data privacy. And so one of the things that we've been doing here in Long Beach is working with our platform designers to ensure that data security is at the forefront, making sure that beyond and before anything else, that the data that is being shared is protected. And I'll be honest with you, the hardest nut to crack in this issue of addressing end-to-end visibility, or the lack thereof, isn't the technology. The technology exists. Other industries, other sectors already employ this technology. It's giving the shippers and those who own the data the comfort, the peace of mind that if they do share the data, it's going to be protected. And so that's why it requires all of us as a port ecosystem to share that common philosophy, that common view, to ensure that as data crosses the different nodes in the supply chain, as it crosses industries, it crosses different entities, that the data is protected. And again, one of the common questions that I often get is what keeps you up at night? Certainly cybersecurity and the protection of data. So that's an issue that we'll continue to keep a close eye on here in the next several years.
Yeah, so speaking of cybersecurity, Noel, how do you reassure participants over that issue?
So as the industry becomes more interdependent and interoperable by sharing data, it becomes even more important to ensure that every leg of where that data is being shared shares a view on data privacy and cybersecurity. So I think what's important here is that we have to embrace a culture of cybersecurity. Long behind us are the days where you could just take cybersecurity on a leisurely basis. It's now at the forefront of everything that we do. We've seen so many examples of how one cyber attack in a remote place of the world eventually trickles down to a port or an operation here in the US. We don't want to be that disruptor to the supply chain elsewhere either. And so one of the things that I think is critically important for all of us is that as organizations, as port authorities, that we have a top-down approach to cybersecurity, have someone at the highest levels of the organization ensure that you have a cybersecurity advocate, a champion, who's going to help build that culture. Here in Long Beach, for example, we have regular cybersecurity training, tests, ethical hacking. We do everything that we can to stay ahead of the latest possible cyber hack attack. Our own CEO is, he brought his experience from the Federal Maritime Commission to our organization several years ago, and it's become part of our culture now, making sure that we close the gaps and we mitigate to the extent possible every opportunity for a cyber attack to disrupt our operations. Secondly, working very closely with our partners. It's one thing for us as port authorities, in our case, a landlord port, to be cyber safe and employ the best practices, but we also have to make sure that all of our partners are embracing the same philosophy and the same view, and they're doing what they need to do to keep their operations safe. So there's a lot of coordination, there's a lot of syncing of best practices to ensure that a port like ours is protected from a cyber attack.
Thank you so much. I want to turn it over quickly to Carrie before we move on. What does AAPA have to say about cybersecurity and IT when it comes to port operations? I'm sure you've vetted the topic at length, so I'm curious to hear your response to that.
Appreciate the chance to respond to it. There's hardly anything I could add to what Noel just said about the threat facing us in the face about cybersecurity when it comes to data integrity or data security, and also the interface between the IT and the OT. So if your IT systems get hacked and your operational technology, your cranes, for example, have a bridge with your IT, you've all of a sudden just compromised your OT as well. Just a quick story. We had the U.S. Coast Guard cyber protection team down the hall from me, about 8 young, incredible coasties, cybersecurity experts in our office for about 2 weeks. And they ran what Noel termed an ethical hacking exercise on our trade association to see where our vulnerabilities were. And these people were incredible. Many of them fresh out of school practically, so very well versed in sort of the latest threats, technologies, et cetera. We were able to keep them going with donuts and breakfast sandwiches, what young folks care about. But I was, my eyes, it certainly keeps me up at night too. And even still, my eyes were open to, oh my gosh, I never thought of that threat vector. Oh my gosh, I never thought that someone could access our systems that way. So I would just, you have a sophisticated audience at Marine Log, a lot of mariners, vessel operators who know that the Coast Guard leads on this type of stuff. Get with the Coast Guard and proactively assess your IT and OT to see where your vulnerabilities are.
Thank you. I'd like to jump ahead actually really quickly. Do ports play a role in facilitating growth in U.S. exports, and how can they help? Noel, I was hoping you could respond to that.
Absolutely, and we should. Here in Long Beach, we have the distinction of being the nation's leading export port over the last 3 years. And we're proud of that because we recognize that exports fuel the U.S. economy, creating jobs, spurring business activity. And we export here through Long Beach a lot of agricultural products, a lot of food products that are very popular overseas, but we also export a lot of raw materials that are used overseas to manufacture goods that make their way back in the form of imports. So one of the things that we do here in Long Beach in order to help support our export community is we're in daily touch with them. We're members of all the associations, whether it's AgTC and others, to ensure that we're doing everything that we can to help them maximize the movement of exports through our port complex. That involves coordinating not just with the shipping lines and the exporters, but coordinating with the railroads, making sure that there's westbound, eastbound balance, leveraging the supply chains that currently exist, and looking for new opportunities to tap and maximize markets. I'll give you one example. A couple of years ago, we entered into this strategic alliance with the Utah Inland Port Authority. There's about 2 million TEU of containerized imports that arrive through our port complex and make their way to the Intermountain region. Now think about that. That's 2 million TEU. And most of that, 90% of that cargo makes its way to the Salt Lake City hub, that region, via truck. Imagine if we could leverage the rail services that currently cross through that area. And if we do that, if we can manage to move inbound cargo to Salt Lake City via an existing rail line, imagine the possibilities of moving exports through there as well. So that's just one example of how we're always looking for new opportunities, new ways to help support the exporters here in our country.
It's great. Jason, exports 2024. Can you tell us how Duluth plans to address rising costs, elevated grain prices, and so on?
Yeah, it's an interesting time here in the Port of Duluth Superior. Part of a strong economy is a strong dollar. And a strong dollar, as you know, can have a dampening effect on exports. So that's not necessarily a great thing for a port like ours. Grain is our #1 export in terms of total tonnage. And it's been a tough couple years for grain exports out of our port, frankly. And the strong dollar plays a role in that, makes it more expensive for countries to import our grain, which is extremely high quality grain. So it's premium grain to begin with. And the strength of the US dollar can actually challenge us in terms of the exports. And then we've also had to deal with drought through certain parts of the Midwest and other crops competing with our primary types of crops that we ship, which would be wheat. So there have been a lot of headwinds and a lot of things that are outside of our control in the way of grain exports. And we certainly hope to see those things, some of those things, as many as can possibly improve in 2024. We're doing the things that we can control, which is being in constant dialogue with farmers, producers, canners, elevator operators, agricultural groups, ag buyers through both domestically and internationally to try to strengthen the existing relationships we have and create new opportunities to export more grain. Because just like Noel said, I mean, the more we can export, the better it is for our region's economy as well, and the people who are employed by the port, things like that. So that's definitely a focus of ours. One other area that we've made a big change in 2023 was through the launch of a transatlantic regularly scheduled monthly liner service that connects Duluth to Antwerp. And that has worked for import and export. It's been a huge success so far with a variety of different cargoes, everything ranging from containerized cargoes to specialized grains, to heavy lift cargoes, break bulk pieces, farming equipment, mining equipment, things like that. So we're really looking in 2024 to see that transatlantic liner service continue to grow and see if we can continue to stimulate more exports through our port, not just of the grains that we've exported for over 150 years now, but some of the other cargoes that move through our port as well.
Sure. That's interesting. Mac, sorry, I'm going to turn it over to you for a second. Morgan City has a unique export profile. What do you see 2024 and beyond looking like for the port in terms of exports?
Heather, we see things on the rise for us. Our channel is in good shape now. We got our 20 plus foot channel right now. And it's all about location and marketing. Everything's location. We think Morgan City is situated. I've got Baton Rouge to the north of me, about 70 miles. I got New Orleans to the east of me, about 80 miles. I got Lake Charles to my west. We're surrounded by the major ports. I'm not putting those ports out of business. I can promise you that. But for this, there is a niche in the marketplace. Not every port in the Caribbean or Mexico can handle 30,000 TEUs or 40,000 metric tons of grain. They got to take the smaller stuff in. And that's where we see our market. South Louisiana has a lot of agriculture. We're looking at moving material in bulk, super sacks. We're looking at moving containers. We're also looking at importing material in. The larger ports a lot of times don't want to deal with a 300 or 400 foot ship that needs 5,000 tons or 6,000 tons. They'd rather deal with the bigger stuff. Well, that's where the Port of Morgan City, we think we have a niche in the market, and I think we're going to hit our strides in 2024.
It's great to hear. Carrie, kind of a long-winded question I'm about to ask you. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act were major legislation achievements for ports and the maritime industry at large, really. Can you kind of say how your organization is now trying to get those funds distributed faster so we can get shovels in the ground? So can you tell us more about this? And I think our audience would be really interested to hear what your efforts have been like.
Yeah, no doubt. These landmark pieces of legislation, one of them was bipartisan, one of them was partisan. So there are a couple different ways to skin the cat and get things done in Washington. But in any event, the ports have got stuff done in Washington. These two bills total upwards of $20 billion of infrastructure and ops, maintenance, and other upgrades, modernization for our ports. So I'd like to give a shout out and a round of applause to our policymakers in Washington. They're definitely getting the job done when it comes to the need for intermodal freight infrastructure. Part of the issue, however, though, is when you really start to dig into it and you want to apply to the federal government for these competitive grants, my gosh, is it cumbersome to try to get this money. There are often a lot of strings attached. You need to have certain aspects of your project that are acceptable to the government bureaucrats. Just the sheer number of pages that you have to read through and the sheer number of boxes you have to check off and comply with can be really, really cumbersome. So what we'll be rolling out either in Q4 of this year or in Q1 of 2024 is the Port Infrastructure Permitting Empowerment Act. And this is basically a piece of legislation that will slice through a lot of the red tape and cumbersome nature of having to apply for the money to make it easier and faster. Can you believe it takes about 7.5 years to get a major infrastructure project at a port built. We're getting our lunch eaten by our trading competitors around the world. They don't throw up that many roadblocks to building things. So at the end of the day, we just like to make the process a lot faster, and that's what we're working on.
That is an interesting fact for sure. Mac, Morgan City has recently experienced a high level of funding for dredging, infrastructure, and equipment. While this is really great, what about expedited funding of grants? So kind of relating to what Carrie was just talking about. How would this be helpful to not only your port, but to others?
Carrie, you're 100% right. It is ridiculous. It's hard enough to win an award. You got to go through a lot of work just to win it, and you're very fortunate if you do get it. Knock on wood, the Port of Morgan City, we did receive 2 MARAD grants. Those are not easy to get. We just received one 2 weeks ago. We received about 27.7% of the money allocated. Very thankful, very fortunate. We received a $10 million MARAD grant last year. We've got the grant. That's the beauty part of it. We've got it expedited. We're going to use it for our projects. We're doing engineering design. But it will be several years before I see the first penny of that money. In the meantime, the port, I'm paying out all the engineering. We've got a project going on our dock right now. But I'm glad we got the grant. We wouldn't be able to do the projects without it. But it puts a big burden on the ports. You can do a $10 million project. Well, I'll have to come up with that $10 million by the time, or I could wait. But the time, if I waited, if the project was going to cost me $10 million, if it takes me 3 to 4 years before I break ground, well, that same project not changing one iota from it. Nothing stays the same. You're probably looking at, with inflation, you're probably looking at maybe a $13 million project. But and your grant doesn't change, you're still only going to get that amount. So if there's some way to help, like Carrie said, expedite it, cut through the red tape. It's hard enough just to get them, but then when you get it, now it just takes time. So if the system could be streamlined, it would be it would save the ports lots of money, which will help us get to create jobs for the area a lot quicker. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Well said. Before we sign off for the day, I want to give each of the 3 ports represented, and then Carrie, I will end with you in just a bit. I want to know very briefly your outlook for 2024 in ports. If you could kind of summarize it in a few sentences, what would you say? And Jason, I'm going to put you on the spot first and hand it over to you.
Here in the Port of Duluth Superior, the season starts for us with ice breaking. So the Soo Locks are the gateway between Duluth Superior across Lake Superior to the lower Great Lakes. So any 2024 outlook has to begin there with the ice breaking assets for the U.S. Coast Guard that are an aging fleet, and we're really cheering for the Coast Guard to be able to do all that it can to keep those shipping lanes open. But it's always with crossed fingers as we look to the U.S. government to really help the Coast Guard modernize its ice-breaking fleet. So 2024 outlook begins with hopefully no hindrance from ice at the beginning of the season when the Soo Locks open. From there, we look for strong steel demand domestically, which helps drive the iron ore for us. A continuation of our transatlantic liner service and growth in that, hopefully a rebound on the grain side of things. And we're also excited about the strong volume of infrastructure projects in our area. So that's helped drive a lot of cement and structural steel coming into our port. So that's been good for our port, good for our region, and we'll hope to see that continue as well.
All right, Noel, same question to you. 2024, what do you think?
Sure. Well, from a business standpoint, we think 2024, if 2023 was a return to normal, 2024 is going to look even more like normal. And by normal, I mean 2019 and prior to the pandemic. Of course, there's a lot of disruption that could impact the different lines of business that Carrie described earlier. But we are very confident, and we are continuing to build out our infrastructure. In fact, in 2024, we're going to embark on our next 10-year CapEx program, which has a price tag of $2.2 billion. We've been very fortunate here in Long Beach to receive some of the grant funding that Carrie made reference to, whether it's through MERA, the PIDP program, or the Department of Energy, the Hydrogen Hub funding. We're going to continue to move forward with these infrastructure improvements because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep us competitive. But at the same time, we're going to continue down the path in our quest to zero emissions operations. Zero emissions cargo handling equipment by 2030, zero emissions trucks by 2035. And we're also going to partner with the state and the federal government to build out the infrastructure that we need to power up all that zero emissions technology.
All right, Mac, same question, 2024.
We're excited about 2024. The Port of Morgan City, we have a lot of fabrication going on in the area. We have the U.S. Navy down here working on some long-term contracts with some of our vendors. We have the U.S. Army. I don't know, they got landing craft. I thought the Navy had the boats, but the Army has landing craft. Those things are being refurbished at one of the shipyards. We have major defense contractors down here building huge dry docks for the nuclear submarine program. And all these places I'm talking about, they're located on one thing. They're located on the waterway. And why they're there? Because we have a channel now. So the area is very, very busy. And in January of this year, we had a company move in called Performance. There's a huge LNG plant going down in Plaquemine, Louisiana. It's going to be one of the largest LNG plants in America. They have 4,000 employees working down there right now around the clock. We have about 1,000 working out to the east of us, fabricating a lot of the components. The good thing about it, all those components will be put on big ocean-going barges, will be towed down the river, out in the Gulf, brought around to the mouth of the Mississippi. So we're very proud of the fact that our fabrication is busy. Years ago, I knew what the term backlog was. Well, the oil field declined, you had COVID, everything was not looking too good. No, there's no such thing as backlog. Now all our fabrication yards have backlogs. We're breaking into the wind energy market, but we're not putting the wind sources off the Louisiana coast, but a lot of those components, the ships that work, are being built here in South Louisiana and in this area and everything. So we're very proud of the area. The economy's going well, and a lot of stuff's going for. We got big international companies here that's working. So,
good.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Carrie, quickly, as we've approached the end of this segment, thoughts from American Association for Port Authorities. Sorry, any insight as we move closer to 2024?
I know we're short on time. I'll be quick, but I do have three big trends I'm watching. The first is all of the amazing projects being executed at the ports, like those that Noel, Mac, and Jason are running. It's pretty exciting with the funding in the system and the modernization of the port infrastructure. Two is a presidential election. Joe Biden has staked so much of his agenda on Green New Deal style job creation and alternative energy production. Will that continue? Will he even run? Will Trump make his will he reemerge back on stage and impose a lot of the tariffs and trade war tactics that he did before, which are going to disrupt supply chains? So that's one, that's two, and three is the cliff of retirements that we're facing in maritime and across other sectors of the economy. We saw the Great Resignation during the supply chain crunch, which hit supply chain workers very hard. We've got people running ports and maritime entities saying that their entire senior management team is probably going to retire in the next 12 to 20 months. So how can we get a new crop of energetic workers in our amazing industry?
Thank you, Carrie. On behalf of Marine Log and Nokia, we'd like to thank the speakers for their insights and the audience for tuning in. To know more about Nokia's projects for ports, please do visit their website and experience their latest self-assessment tool. Again, thank you so much, Mac, Carrie, Jason, Noel, for joining us today. What you said is just so very vital to the port and maritime industry. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe.